Welcome to Elemental Energy, the podcast where we discuss how to simplify decarbonization. Here, we will introduce emerging low-carbon energy technologies and give you insight on how to navigate and support the evolving energy landscape. It is our goal to develop content to give you confidence to help transition the market and make low-carbon energy reliable and affordable. I'm your host, Marsha Leonard. Everybody, welcome to today's episode. I am so excited for this conversation with Stu Turley. He is the CEO of Sandstone Group. And not only is he the CEO of Sandstone, but he is probably one of the most famous people I've had on the podcast, besides maybe Robert Bryce, but he is hilarious. He has a podcast called Three Podcasters Walk Into a Bar. He is just a major voice in the energy industry. And his larger view of the energy landscape is what really attracted me to him in order to have a conversation about energy subsidies. Stu, welcome to Elemental Energy.
Hey, well, thank you. I sure appreciate you. And I've enjoyed getting to know you. And I've just really enjoyed just trying to figure out what you've got going on.
Well, what I've got going on is I've bridged the gap between oil and gas into the world of power generation. And I'm starting to see the benefits of electrification. And I'm just trying to help everybody else undergo their own energy transition of sorts.
Right. Well, I like the way you say that you're bridging to electrification, because there's such an electrification, either you love it or you hate it. Like my father-in-law, who just bought his Tesla, tried to come up to a very long trip to go to West Texas from Dallas, and it was a nightmare. He finally got to West Texas, and West Texas is not all the EV friendly. And then all of a sudden he had to spend like a 4 or 5 mile walk at night or whatever it was at 1 a.m. to go get his car charged. And then he had to go back the next morning. And here's an 80-year-old man at 1 a.m. having to walk all this way to get his Tesla charged. Electrification is not all that easy.
And I'm talking about a much broader version of electrification. So definitely not EVs, because I live in the middle of nowhere. I drive a diesel Jetta. I get 55 miles per gallon. Life
Isn't that great?
But I'm talking about the bigger picture of electrification, of how we can clean up current processes to help eliminate the carbon emissions that everybody is working towards and achieving net zero, like electrifications of our oil and gas processes even, and nuclear for thermal heat and electricity. How cool is that going to be?
Oh, I think it's great. And there are leaders out there like Chris Wright. He's the CEO over at Liberty Energy. They've electrified their frac fleet, and absolutely love Chris. He's got a great job out there, and he's really working towards nuclear modular reactors to really power his frac fleets. So he's all in on lowering the emissions on that side. So you have some great executives out there really leading the way on that.
Yes, I agree. Doug Sandridge, I brought him in on the podcast a few episodes
Isn't
back.
he a cool cat?
Oil and gas executives for nuclear. And
I've got the shirt right over here. I signed the deal. I love Doug. He's a cool cat.
I do too. And I love that the movement is happening. I had the pleasure of going to the Advanced Reactor Summit a few weeks ago in Houston, and Natura Resources, Doug Sandridge, another major, just amazing person stepping in from oil and gas into nuclear by helping develop research reactors with Abilene Christian University to integrate. Yes, it's amazing.
Yep. The whole nuclear technology being supported by oil and gas, Doug hit it out of the park with his taking this as the executive director, because everybody's saying, oh, oil and gas hates nuclear. No, I have never met anybody in the oil and gas space that is anti-nuclear. We're in low-cost energy with the least amount of impact on the environment. And we're all, yay, let's run down that road.
And I meant to say Doug Robeson for Natural Resources. I got messed up on my Dougs. Oh my goodness. Doug Goose. Okay, so Stu, let's talk about subsidies because I have always thought of subsidies as something negative and it makes it seem so complex. But
Right.
I also see a little bit of value and benefit to subsidies. But the energy industry, let's just talk about the history of
Absolutely.
subsidies and where it's gone.
Let me start with this. There's a difference between a subsidy and a tax incentive. Tax incentive incentivizes investment and you're taking it out of profits. Subsidies is like right now in the UK has to subsidize the power bills in the UK to the consumers because the consumers can't afford, they're in energy poverty right now because of their energy policies. They've been forcing wind and solar, and the grid is now unstable. They have, I believe, 4 major interconnects where they import electricity from Norway. They have the Viking interconnect that just came online. They have all these that they're importing these in. They have to subsidize the consumers because the design of the electrification is bad. That's one way of talking about a subsidy. Another subsidy was when Barack Obama was at Solaris that he subsidized trying to get the solar panels started. Subsidies are good for investments for being able to start new technologies. I'm all in. There's a certain point when you have to subsidize new technologies and get them ready to be able to be supported in the market. Solaris went bankrupt. I mean, it was like it did nothing. So that all that taxpayer money went away. In the Great Lakes, out of the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a wind project that had $57 million in tax savings and subsidies that were built into this to get it started. $37 million of it was wasted in permitting only. So that subsidy went to permitting and 0 wind turbines were put in. So subsidies without a plan to go market ready equals waste. Make sense?
It makes sense. But what I am trying to do is
I get confused.
I'm trying to make sense, CENTS,
Okay.
for these energy transition projects to help them become a reality because they're so expensive,
Right.
because they're first of a kind. And what I got confused with the tax credits being a
Right.
subsidy of sorts, but it's
Okay.
not.
It's
Is that
not.
what you just told me? Okay.
That is correct.
So
People are interchanging those words and they're incorrect. And so that's the hard part because everybody says, let's end the subsidies for fossil fuels. You see this everywhere. Oh, we got to kill all the so there's really the number one reason that people are drilling. There's 2 kinds of investments in oil and gas right now. You can go to the big ones. You can go to Exxon Mobil. They just did Pioneer, and you get the returns. ESG, Marcia, when you have the ESG investing that went through, and you had oil and gas people were not very good with investing dollars. They would take your money and then they would just spend it, and it was really bad. They got a really black eye. In the last 20 years, they really ESG investing did do a good thing in getting their money back, in forcing oil and gas companies to behave with corporate governance and giving their investor monies back. But in 50% of the oil in the US is generated out of private companies, and the tax incentives or tax investments with tax benefits are available in those scenarios so that you can depreciate a well. A well, when you drill it, has a decline curve on it. So it's a depreciating asset. So if you invest, I'm going to throw these numbers out here as a ballpark. If you invest $100,000 in oil and gas, based off of the numbers that I've run on some of mine, you can take $98,000 off of your taxes that year, ballpark. Again, everyone is a little bit different. That is a tax, but I had to have made $98,000 worth of profit or would have had to pay that amount of money, which is different than President Obama or President Biden or President Trump giving me $100,000. Significant difference in that, in order to do that. Now, based on my investment in the oil and gas, I'm also getting money off of a residual off of the production. So if the deal is done right, you can invest in it. The tax incentive gets the extra dollars to get to the oil field, and then the subsidy is out of it. I'm visiting with a lot of other folks that are renewable energy folks that are doing trash to treasure. And so when you take somebody's trash, I love absolutely, we were talking about hydrogen just a bit ago. They can take a trash pile, city trash pile, pull natural gas out of it, and that's a perfect spot for you to drop in one of your hydrogen, your next projects, and have that city make money off of those kinds of things. And then there is no subsidy going on. Now, would it be a tax incentive? That might be something totally different, because then somebody would want to support that local government in those kind of things. So I think, and I just interviewed Paul Tice. In fact, it released today, the day that we're filming this, and that is on the history of ESG investing in oil and gas and everything else. So ESG investing has helped, but it's also gotten a black eye.
So please educate me. I'm utilizing this as a learning moment. It sounds like we really don't have subsidies necessarily around any of our current energy transition projects.
Yes.
Amazing. That's good.
That's a fair way to say it. Now, overinflating goes on, and let's go back into this, and just, it gets a little confusing. So what happens let's go to wind farms, because wind farms, how long do you think a wind farm lasts?
Full asset life cycle with operations and maintenance, I would say around 30 years.
Okay, let's back into some numbers. In the US, the average profitability of a wind farm is never. When you cannot put in a wind farm to meet market expectations ever, without the subsidies up front and the tax incentives for the energy provider, period. Doesn't happen. Warren Buffett said, quote unquote, "I will not invest in wind unless it has tax incentives and subsidies." So here's the thing. The numbers are hidden out there, Marcia. You would not believe how bad it is. I've interviewed a ton of folks. Wind farms, mean time between failure is less than 8 years. Less than 8 years. So let's take your subsidy, and what's happening right now with the Inflation Reduction Act is that the maintenance costs at 8-year mark is all of a sudden so expensive. All of these, like Duke Energy and Dominion and everybody else, are having to go to their ratepayers and try to increase their costs at 8 years. Okay, let's back into this in here in just a second. What they do then is at that point, when they go into the 6-year mark, they are now eligible to reapply for the Inflation Reduction Act, so that the whole wind thing is now a scam or a Ponzi scheme, if you would, from a standpoint of instead of 30 years, you're now down to the 6 and 5 year, and they're starting to rebuild and refund and then re-put this in there, and it's all on the printed money. It is not sustainable. When you take a look at the high cost of energy, the cost of energy in California is the third highest in the United States. There's 2 others, and they are all wind and solar related. It's because they are more expensive. Texas is half of California. Does that make sense?
I'm digesting a lot right now because I still have a soft spot for wanting. I believe that all energy has a place.
I
And
agree.
I really do.
100%.
I think that if it's the right situation, you need to truly assess what your geography is, what your needs are, all of it before you make a decision on what energy to add to your mix. But
I Let's end energy poverty. This is where I get all excited, because we need to get the lowest kilowatt per hour to everyone on the planet without printing money, without subsidies, letting the market drive it. And then here's where I really want to have a good discussion, because I get excited about hydrogen in many ways, but on wind and solar right now, let's talk about oil and gas reclamation. Hydrogen is not there yet, so it's really not part of that mix. Orphan wells have been a gigantic problem over the years in oil and gas, and it drives me nuts. Fortunately, let's take Texas. They have now a fund where they are forcing, and the ESG has done a great thing. They are now really policing this up, and there's some really cool leaders out there, like Sarah Stonger out there, and she's out leading the charge against these zombie orphan well things and all that. That's great. That is in the process in a mature market, and the market is beating them up and then really going after it. I wouldn't mind subsidies going back after it, but let's talk about reclamation for wind farms. The average wind farm, one windmill, is about $500,000 just to get the steel out of the ground. That doesn't include the metal of the tower. They just announced this past Thursday in Norway that they had a new windmill blade that was recyclable, made out of wood. That is not scalable. You go look at the Marseille, you could see all of the death beds of windmills in West Texas, and they're not recyclable. So the land reclamation is based on the contracts that I have read for the landowners. If it's not in there, guess who gets to get that land reclaimed back to farmland or ranch land at the end of this thing? We are now coming into this where it is a gigantic global problem coming around the corner for these. And solar panels, they just had a 3,000 acre solar panel get wiped out by a hailstorm. What happens to solar panels right now? We ship them overseas. Tell me that this is not ESG friendly when we're dumping this. And when you have the Congo, there's 50,000 kids that are slave labor right now for the critical minerals. That's why I want to own a Tesla. I want to own a Cybertruck. I think it'd be cool. They're bulletproof. Sign me up. But I can't because of that. Now, I am a hypocrite. I'm going to tell you flat out, I'm putting in 2 gas generators, propane generators. I've got One of the houses already has a solar on it. I've got batteries. So I'm going to have backup wind, solar, and dual generators for my 4 buildings here. Here's the problem. Everything I bought was from China. I tried to source it from somewhere else, couldn't get it. And I'm a hypocrite. And somebody made a comment to me when I was on a podcast. I was like, oh, you buy it. And there's no manufacturers in the US.
What if we subsidized to bring in manufacturers and
They
get
did.
here?
Solaris. And it went bankrupt.
Oh my goodness. Did we just come full circle? We just came full circle. Okay.
But let's go back to hydrogen. Hydrogen is it white hydrogen, which is natural? I don't know much about that, and I'm excited about it. I love me some nuclear. Love nuclear. Speaking of Doug, and I got to get my shirt and show it up here, my hat. I love nuclear, and hydrogen in all of its form right now does not have the reclamation baggage that wind and solar have. Right now, I am all in on wind. I think wind is great. But the EIA this past week just put out and said, even though we've put in 60 megawatts of wind, we had a reduction in wind output across the US because the wind stopped blowing this year. So you cannot depend on wind and solar. Physics and fiscal responsibility matter on the grid. It does not care.
Stu, I always like asking this question for people who have been steeped in the energy industry for especially as long as you have and as long as I and my family have. Do you believe in climate change?
No.
And you don't think so?
I believe, let me rephrase that. I don't want you kicked off of any of the TV, anything. I believe climate change happens naturally. I believe that man-made geoengineering is ongoing right now. It is not a conspiracy theory anymore. Dubai just spent $2.8 million in order to seed their clouds, and they flooded. Why did they flood? I did a podcast on this, and I've got the video. We've just spent $2.8 million in cloud seeding, and then they flooded because they never got that much rain before, and it cost them billions of dollars in damage.
You need to prepare for a city that has absolutely no flood infrastructure. Just go cloud seeding.
Okay. And then when we take a look at other cloud seeding and everything else, chemtrails used to be a conspiracy theory. Why are there 2 states banning chemtrails now? Why are like 6 more than I know of starting to ban chemtrails? So the answer is the UN has already tried to target me several times on my podcasts, and they've shut me down. Google does not like me. And I have found a way around Google in order to get my podcast and my story out.
So, Stu, you can take this for a grain of sand if you want. But when I was going through college, I graduated with a degree in environmental and molecular biology.
You know a lot more than I do.
I did not believe in climate change at all. And what I thought was that the earth went in cycles, just like you are saying. We've had ice ages, we've had days of immense heat. I really thought about that. But the more and more that I reflected back on my days in chemistry and recognizing the impact of different molecules, that you remember the rift in the ozone that everybody thought it was caused from Aquanet, but we just came full circle.
Yes.
And the refrigerants, like those, if you think about 200 years ago when we were at 1 billion people, and we are now what, 8.5 billion, almost 9 billion people. And you think about the output of carbon dioxide and other methanes and different types of chemicals that we're putting into our atmosphere. I would rather be wrong about believing in climate change and thinking that we are having an impact and still trying to stop it than not, is where I have come to, because it just makes so much sense. If you think about the science and going back and tracking the history, Al Gore, God bless him, crazy, but so stinking smart in some ways, about having a pattern
Right.
through ice cores and tree rings and paleoclimatology to see the different changes. We're supposed to be getting cooler right now if we're going by paleoclimatology history. And so
Right.
I would rather be wrong and try to help the situation than not.
Let me, I, I like that thought. That's a fantastic way to look at it. But let me ask you this. Why is it that the climate change folks, and you may want to cut some of this out. Why is it that the climate change folks are manipulating the data so badly? I just interviewed Fritz Brunging. He is on the CO2 Coalition, and this is supposed to be the hottest summer that has ever been on record. And all of these problems are going on. And he's found 23 sensors in the Antarctic that they are modifying the data coming out of it so that they can say the world is now going through this climate change, but it's the data that they're manipulating in order to do that. Why is it that the sensors in the United States are put next to air conditioners? You cannot judge a city's temperature based off of the whole continent, based off of where you put your sensors, because if it's in a city or next to an air conditioner, there's a rule, you got to have some scientific rules about where you put your sensors. There's a whole nother study that came out on that.
I could see where that would be like, that's so micro, that's so tiny. But when I look at a bigger picture, have you heard of the infrastructure?
Let me just say these 23 sensors. These 23 sensors in the Antarctic are enough that they changed the entire global number. So we may talk about 23 sensors, but when you're talking Antarctica, that's a big number. And you're talking that amount of data that they're now forecasting around the world.
I'm trying to think of the actual impacts other than data, because this is my take on data. You can make data say whatever you want it to say. That's the problem with data. It's about how you analyze data. So adopting an intuitive mindset and a bigger picture is, I
Like the
believe.
way you think. You
Thank you. Thank you very much. Like, have you heard of the infrastructure that they've installed in Miami to where they're combating high tide with pumps under the system? Have you heard about this?
No.
Multi-millions of dollar of subsea infrastructure and sub street level infrastructure for pumps. So when high tide rises, because it's going on streets now, they're just preparing and putting a Band-Aid in order to say, hey, Miami's still great. Come on out, even though you're going to wade through water if our entire electric grid shuts down around high tide. Like, there's bigger problems that you can see visually when it comes down to water levels rising around the globe, specifically coastal. The glaciers
Why do
melt
millionaires buy homes on the coast?
because
Billion.
they want to see their offshore wind farms.
Yeah.
Duh, that's why. That's why. They buy them on the coast because it's beautiful, but they also have the money to afford the different flood insurances. There have even been insurance companies who have adopted their policies with climate change in their write-up to adopt for climate change. I mean, there's just so many things that are pointing to it, which is why I'm a huge proponent of trying to figure out a way to reduce carbon emissions through the entire energy value chain, because we still need petrochemicals from oil and
you and I are in 300% with that. Yes, let's reduce. But here's where I think it's one of the key elements is what we have just witnessed with Germany and is happening in the US right now. By having a too focus of a energy policy with too many subsidies, not enough tax incentives. We're witnessing the deindustrialization of Germany and subsequently how Germany goes. So does the EU. The EU is collapsing right now. What's happened in Germany? BASF just lost their natural gas, their fertilizer plant went to China. They have closed their oldest steel mill in its 200-year-old company that is now deindustrialized. They shut down all their nuclear. And this past week, they just had an article come out that they had an agency lie about it in order to shut down their nuclear reactor. Germany is bad energy policies on steroids. California has also followed the same path. Look at Texas. Texas does a lot of things right, but their policy is they have coal, they have natural gas, they have nuclear. They got everything right there. Why did Total Energy from France, it's Oklahoma, Texas way to say that, Total Energy, why did they buy a lot of natural gas power plants in the U.S.? Here, they had gone totally 2 years ago, and now they're suddenly investing in natural gas power plants. Total's also invested in two other major events. They just invested yesterday, announced in the U.S. for a renewable natural gas organic on a farm. I love that. I think that is about the coolest thing in the world, is getting renewable natural gas. That's where we need to drop in a hydrogen plant right there on all of them cows, so everybody would leave my cows alone. Sorry.
This is why I need to buy a pig. I'm going to tell you the story. My husband and I, we spent 2.5 weeks in Costa Rica on our honeymoon, and we got a Defender 110 with a roof tent and a snorkel on it. And we just drove all of Costa Rica. And we ended up at this coffee plantation that was fully self-sustained. All of its power came from on site. All of its gas for cooking came from their pig, Curly, so appropriate. And they put all of the waste into this, like a hole in the ground, captured the gas, and that's what they made all of their cheese, all of it. It was just amazing to see that full life cycle supported in one farm in one area. And I think about going out and trying to help eliminate energy poverty by implementing the RNG aspect and small scale. How amazing. Because you can keep those RNG stoves, like compost stoves. Those are real things, and they're not hard to make. Imagine going from kerosene to that, how much cleaner it would be for people.
Absolutely. And it's about ending energy poverty with market sustainability. The thing that drives me nuts is renewable energy is not sustainable.
So we've rabbit holed from our initial subsidies.
You may, again, I'm sorry for ruining our discussion here.
No, you did not ruin it. This is the kind of open dialogue that needs to be had to talk about energy sobriety, another Doug Sandridge term, as he wants everybody to be sober about what we are currently facing. And renewables, although I have a very close place in my heart, because I think it took a lot for us to get here to see the evolvement away from oil and gas and away from molecules into electrons. I think that was a huge shift in mindset for people.
Absolutely. And I fully applaud the effort in solar and wind. And I am a big fan. And I'll tell you, after on the weekends working on my own little backup plan around here, because the grid may not be sustainable. So everybody needs to have backup plans. And I'm learning a lot about getting my hands on the wind turbines, on doing all this stuff, and then getting there with a calculator and calculating out what is my energy for today, because that helps my discussions when I'm actually talking about, instead of walking through a complete plant or a wind farm, and talking to the CEOs, I actually love getting my hands on the products and trying to figure out if it's actually going to work.
Well, Stu, I would like to know your opinion on how can we leverage not necessarily subsidies at this phase, but like even the tax credits and the government support to help these energy transition projects become a reality. Like if we are doing this smart and setting up a business,
Right.
what is the best way?
Great question. And then tax subsidies and tax incentives. Let's start with the EVs. EVs. I am the fan of EVs from a thought process of, hey, I love the idea, but the batteries are not, we'll leave all that out of it because we've already covered a little bit of that as well. The Biden administration has done a poor job for tax incentives or tax credits, tax credits on the EVs. They've mandated the CO2 output and the emissions on the manufacturers. Ford just announced that they lost, is it $5.8 billion on their EVs this year? That there was $62,000 per EV that they lost. That's because they were mandated. The tax subsidies, let's take a Ford E Mustang. The Ford E Mustang is going to get $7,000 credit unless it was this model. And then it was down to $2,000. And then it was down to here. And so then all the manufacturers said, oh, we're going to build a entire line with these subsidies and then these tax credits to the people, but the tax credits changed. So all the manufacturers built this line, and all of a sudden they don't qualify for any of the subsidies that are in any of these. So my answer is you've got to have a clear energy path and direction from someone in the energy Department of Energy that actually can spell energy. Our current administration does not understand energy, nor do they understand finance. They are absolutely abysmal at both of those two items. So where I would start is there are companies like Green Lily Energy, which is a new company that they can take trash to treasure. There are about 100 plants in the US that are currently taking waste and turning it into electricity. There are others that can take any of the organics that are going to take just like Total just invested in taking farm manure, turning in renew. That is where I would put my money because now carbon credits is a whole different discussion. I think that is a complete waste, but I would definitely put a business around it because it's going to be around for a while.
Let's see if you get this movie quote. I'm getting the pig. If you don't, it's okay. But it's back to my whole I'm getting a pig one day.
I'm getting a pig, baby. I love me some pig. And I tell you, and it's when I see a truck driving down the road that's a pig hauler or a cow hauler, I smell money. Everybody else in the car is going, ooh, it stinks. Not me, man. I smell money. And I stick my head out and I go, the smell of money driving by. I love me cows.
Okay, because I feel you have a great insight on this. How do you feel about the cattle industry being one of the main CO2 producers or methane producers in general? Because there's been push against our cattle industry and how they're polluting groundwater. And
Hogwash.
I grew up in the land of leather. And when I sit back and think about these honest farmers who are trying their best to try and put food on people's tables, it's an interesting attack. So I was wondering what you thought about it.
It's absolutely despicable. And it's about one thing: control. They are trying to control the food source. And why is it coming from the World Economic Forum? Why is it coming from the WHO? Why is it coming from Bill Gates and then funneling into our infrastructure? So the answer is it has nothing to do with farms all over the world. How did we get to 8.5 billion people? We got there with good agriculture. We got there with fertilizer. We got there. Why is it? I want to throw this question out there. Why is the FDA in the United States the most unhealthy Food and Drug Administration on the planet? Why are you can take 2 boxes and it's not allowed in Europe to be sold, but when we have it over here, we have red dye number 5 and all these other cancer causing kind of things. So the answer is, I think the farms are fine. There's not enough burpage going on. In fact, there's a study that just came out on cow burps and actually putting in a breathing apparatus on a dang cow. I'm sorry. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. There were billions, and I'm going to talk like Carl Sagan for half a second. There's billions upon billions of buffalo that we killed, and the grass plains were doing just fine. There is nothing that we could do in the world of cows that is a problem. Now, ammonia is not a very good thing with chickens. Chickens are different. It's a whole different animal. Good pun.
I'm getting a pig, Stu.
I'm getting a pig, baby.
That's going to be the quote of this episode.
I'm getting a pig. I love that. Now, take a look at, was it Mel Gibson in one of his great Australian movies when he was, the road, they had the pig farmer there and everything, and he's in the bottom of it. And they had the one with, what's her name? I'm thinking, I can even think of her name as she was singing. She was the great lady there, but they had the pig methane farmer, and that's how they were generating their electricity, was in that movie. And that's where we need to go.
I just think, no, it's okay. I think it's brilliant for us to be enlightened in this manner, but let's talk about the general population that we have been not tasked, that we have been blessed to be able to serve.
Right.
And thinking about it in a way to help these energy transitions become more economically viable and feasible in order to help eliminate energy poverty in the future, because we're only getting bigger. We're having babies every minute. I mean, it's not going to get any less challenging. And so that's where I really want to focus. Before we even started, I didn't want to tell you the alternative motive I had before we got this question, because I didn't want to be biased, but I want to figure out how we could leverage the IRA's tax credits with hydrogen and nuclear. We originally had started on it, and you started hinting on it, but right. I see true value of being able to take the tax credits, apply them to these new nuclear developers to help them get started by applying it originally to hydrogen, proving that their technology works, and then having them be able to branch into other areas. That's the only way I could see that being leveraged.
And that is in there. It is now going through, but it is being held up by legislation through regulatory actions. So the answer is there are funds available in there for hydrogen under the nuclear in the Inflation Reduction Act. But the EPA is holding up these things. So the number one weapon that we have that we could use is the EPA and the DOE. Those two agencies, if we actually had a discussion with them, could solve a lot of problems. Does that make sense?
I'm going to make it make CENTS. I tell you.
I like that. And the Inflation Reduction Act, I am very disappointed in. In fact, Dan Bongino calls it the Porculus Bill, because there are a lot of things in there that are absolutely ridiculous. And when you take a look at the trillions of dollars that are being wasted, there are smart people, not me, I would ask them, that could do exactly what you and I are talking about on a fourth of what has been printed.
Oh my goodness. Well, Stu, I think that I've taken up, I don't even, when did we start? This has been such a quick conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, just talking the
I
positive.
hope I didn't ruin your day.
You just made it even better with that laugh. That laugh makes me happy.
I thank you so much for your time. I just had an absolute blast. And the key thing that you're doing is you're helping discussions. Ronald Stein is a very good author and a friend of the podcast, and he has, it's all about discussions and energy. I don't know all the answers. I love learning.
I second that. And thank you for coming on Elemental Energy to help other people think about things in a possibly different way than they were thinking and looking at things before. So anything else you want to add to our conversation before we close out?
Oh, I just highly recommend everybody listen to the Elemental podcast, and I can't wait to see your next guest coming out.
Well, thanks, Stu. Everybody stay happy, but most importantly, stay safe. I'm really not sure what Stu and I just accomplished in this conversation, other than having an enjoyable conversation about energy and being sober about what we are facing in the energy industry. I had come into the conversation wanting to talk about subsidies and what kind of support from the government could we have in order to further support these energy transition projects and these low carbon energy projects. But it segued a little bit, but that's okay. I am so hopeful that we can continue to find different ways and different means of helping hydrogen and nuclear become a reality. The people who are putting these businesses and plans together, which don't rely on tax credits, there are people out there who are making their business models less complex and not having to rely on those tax credits, which, let's face it, if you've looked into the 45V tax credit, it is very complex and all the different requirements. I wouldn't want to structure my business in that manner. But thank you all so much for listening. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to LinkedIn with me, Marsha Leonard, MARCIA Leonard, and I look forward to catching up with anybody out there who wants to talk about energy. That's where I'm at.